Hi, everybody. Welcome to Teaching Writing in College, where the driving question is how can instructors in higher education leverage theory, science, pedagogy, and craft most effectively to help their learners with writing? And so today, um, my big question, I guess, is what is going on with handwriting? Right now, our professors are resorting to handwriting in the face of genAI. And I think the answer to that seems to be yes. I hear more talk about that than I ever have, I think, in my career, at least since laptops hit the scene. I have been teaching long enough to remember when laptops were not prevalent in the classroom and students brought notebooks and maybe they printed out their papers and turned those in, but they didn't have laptops. And gradually over time, I've started to see, I started to see more and more laptops, and now, of course, they're everywhere. My own experience, I think I related this before at the Laddie F. Core building in Arizona at Arizona State University, where they built the building and it had computers in every classroom. Every seat for every student had a computer in it. And I remember starting to really lose my students in a way that I hadn't noticed before because they had the screen in front of them. It was harder to get them to talk to each other. It was harder to get them to pay attention to me. And so um, things started to break down. I remember specific instances of that. Um, I have, since then, for a while now, I can't remember how many years, maybe up to 10 years, I maybe a little bit less. I have been requiring students to use handwritten notes in the classroom, and that comes from some studies that I started to find. I ran across this, what I have on the screen now, from the Brookings Institution from 2018. They had a really great article out called For Better Learning in College Lectures, Lay Down the Laptop and Pick Up a Pen by Susan M. Donarski, August 10th, 2017. And this article it's just a synopsis of three studies that talk about some of the detrimental effects of screens on learning in college classrooms. And so at the end, they list, or she, the author lists these studies. One is called The Pen is Mightier Than the Keyboard from Psychological Science in what date? 2014. There's another one, Laptop Multitasking Hinders Classroom Learning for Both Users and Nearby Peers in Computers in Education, back in 2013. And a third one is The Impact of Computer Usage on Academic Performance, Evidence from a Randomized Trial in the United States Military Academy. And the journal was the Economics of Education Review, volume 56 in 2017. And so there have been times where, I will take these articles into students and say, hey, one of them shows that if you have your laptop open and, that might actually distract the people around you. They've done these little controlled studies. And so for reasons like that, I would do things like ask students to turn off their laptops and use pen and paper instead. And then I would use their notes for participation credit. That's what they would turn in for participation credit. And I would give it back to them the next day. So I've been doing that for a while. But now we also have what's happening with Gen AI, and there are some studies that are starting to come out about that. Here's one that I think I shared from the Screen Deep podcast that I heard a few weeks ago. This one is Your Brain on Chat GPT, Accumulation of Cognitive Debt when Using an AI Assistant for Essay Writing Task. And this one I think is out for review right now, but it has been shared on the archive at Cornell University. And so it's sitting out there. You can go read it if you would like. I've got the screenshot for that on the board right now. It's archive, is ARXIV. So I think that's the way they say it, is archive. And you can Google that and find it. And you'll end up with one that looks like this. It's the draft version of their paper, and it's actually very long. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen the table of contents there. It only gets partway through in the screenshot that I have here, but it is very long, and it's an interesting read. They've got some details here that I'd like to share just a little bit. It talks, this is just a screenshot of the abstract. Um, and what they did is they compared three groups. They had brain-only participants in this study that were doing some writing. They had ones that used search engines. So you've got brain-only, you've got search engine users, and then you also have LLM users, large language model users. And so what they were doing is, um, looks like they were having students write essays, and they were taking readings of their brain with EEGs to assess the cognitive load during essay writing, as it says here. And so uh, the basic, let's see, I'm trying to remember, I apologize here. I should have highlighted it, and right now I can't see exactly what's going on. Let's see. Okay, EEG revealed significant differences in brain connectivity. Brain-only participants exhibited the strongest, most distributed networks. Search engine users showed moderate engagement, and LLM users displayed the weakest connectivity. And so, what it's doing here is it's basically just measuring, the brain activity of these three groups when it comes to this essay writing activity. And as I think we've talked about before on the podcast, what's really important, when it comes to learning is what the brain is focused on. The brain learns what it is focused on. And so here, it's clear that the brain only participants were the most focused. There was the most cognitive activity for the brain only group. And so their brain was, working on those synapses the most. So that's really important for AI and writing. And so since we want students to learn about writing in our writing classes, that means for me, that means that, they've got to focus on a lot of particular skills. We want learners to learn about writing. Once again, that key idea there that, it's not necessarily teaching them to write, because when they go into their other classes and when they get out of school, the things that they have to do with writing will vary quite a bit depending on where they go. If they go into engineering, it's going to certain things are going to happen for them. They're going to have to write in certain ways. If they go into computer science or into social work or any other number of disciplines, the way that communication takes place, the way that writing takes place would differ. And so we can't necessarily teach them to write. But as Doug Downs and Diane Wardle argued, or excuse me, Elizabeth Wardle, I'm sorry, I don't know where Diane came from, but Elizabeth Wardle argued that they need to learn about writing. And so for me, when I go into my classes, I've been over this before. Skills I like to take in there. They need to understand genre really well, and I have rocks as a way to do that. You might recall from episodes about a year ago, recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. And then based on that, they need different kinds of strategies. They need content strategies. They need invention from rhetoric, from genre, and so on. They need structure strategies. They need to be able to structure writing. That's a really important activity that I don't think should be offloaded to AI. Adjusting style is another thing that they should do. They should adjusting their style, because different genres are going to sound different. The way the writing, the prose kind of looks, the expectations for that can vary depending on the genre and the audience who helps, shape genre expectations anyway. Things like the penny principle, which I've had an episode or two on. Um, Practicing transfer through detect, elect, connect, all of these things lead to classroom activities that I would do with students in class, or that I do with students in class. And so this list here is just kind of a short version of one that I had on the screen a few episodes ago. But the idea here is that if I have these practice activities, I've got plenty for students to do, plenty for students to take notes on. And so what I do like to do is I like to use Cornell notes. And I found out about Cornell notes about a year ago. Actually, last year was the first year that I started using Cornell notes. I was in a meeting with some folks at my son's uh, school, and they were talking about using Cornell notes. And I had never heard about what they were. We were talking a little bit about teaching and things, and I had never actually heard of Cornell notes, and I already liked to have my students use notes. So I asked what they were, and That's how I found them. I think it's really worth Googling just to get a little bit more. There are a couple of good YouTube videos out there about Cornell notes, but basically, you can see what I have on the screen here. I made my own uh, model of Cornell notes, and so I've got my name and stuff. This is what I like students to do. I've got just for a model, I've got my name, but I have them put their name. I have them put the name they like to go by so that I can learn their names and learn about them and call them what they'd like to be called. Um, what their major is. Mine is English. Their anticipated profession. Mine is educator. And then what group they are in, and then the date. And so those are the kinds of things that I like to have them put up in the corner. But then after that is Cornell notes. And if you're familiar with Cornell notes, we've got three sections. So over here in the margin, and there's actually a new margin. You can see a line there where I've expanded the margin a bit, made it a bit bigger. And so I kind of ignore the pink margin that comes on a lot of, notebook paper. But that margin, the left-hand margin, a little bit wider than the original, is the Q, CUE up there. That's to cue memory when somebody's kind of going over their notes. And so that section contains just, you know, little basic things like maybe a basic little question or maybe the name of a strategy in the case of teaching writing and so on, just little notes about what's going on in the actual notes. And then there's the notes section, and that's the much larger right hand section on this particular piece of paper here. And so it's labeled at the top notes. And what I have here is just a model of things I do in class. And so sometimes I might have students take notes on rocks, recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. I would like them to have that in there. So I've got a title at the top, use rocks to describe a genre. That's something I would probably ask them to put in based on a slide that I have, and then the notes on it. So recurring occasion and what that is, content and what that is, structure and style, what those things are. And then over in the Q, I have the RO next to recurring occasion, the C next to content, S next to structure, S next to style. And then I've got the definitions. And so recurring occasion, what circumstances keep happening in which X type of writing is used, who produces it, who reads it, what central questions does it help answer between writer and reader, and then content, what content does the audience typically expect, structure, how is the X type of writing typically structured, text structure and visual structure, those are both important. And then style, how does the audience expect it to sound? And so that's just a really basic, easy to remember overview of rocks, something students could go back to in their notes because they'd be able to use the cue to help find it. If they can kind of keep their notes organized and stuff, this can be really helpful for them for that. What is rocks? And there's a basic definition. And then also, so this is what I did to create this model is I went back just to one of my PowerPoints where I would introduce um, genre for students. And so after they have a definition of rocks, which is really central to the course, the kind of thing I would do probably even on the first day of class, um, recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. And then in a group, I might have them do what I like to call a rocks analysis on texting, where what they would do is identify those different parts. What's the recurring occasion? What's the content? Or describe the different parts for texting. What's the structure of texting and what's the style of texting. And so once again, I have a model here with some fictitious student names, but I would have them divide this up if they're doing this in groups, maybe in this fictitious group, Jacqueline would do the recurring occasion and they would do the content and just describe the content a little bit. What kind of content is typical in a text? And Laura might do structure, what's the structure of texting, and then Grant, what's the style, how does it sound normally, what do people normally expect from texts? And so uh, they would take notes on that together, kind of do a little jigsaw. Yeah, that's right here in the notes. And that's what I have on this side. And then on the back side, they could continue, in my class, it's going to be long enough where oftentimes students might fill the front and back of a sheet of paper like this. And then down at the bottom of this, in this, it's kind of an upside down T chart almost. There's a summary. There's some space sectioned off for a summary at the end, and that's something that they would do at the end of class or maybe at the end of a particular lesson where they might summarize something depending on what kind of questions I ask them. And so here for summary, I've got lots of kinds of writing may look different on the surface, but on the deep side, there are common elements. Elements just vary for different audiences. And so that's just kind of my shorthand way of, some sort of main point I would get from a lesson like this, and students could do, something similar. But in the queue, you can see that they've got the rocks definition. It's labeled there in the left-hand column, and the ROCSS, kind of down the column. And then for the group activity, it's labeled as a group activity, and then just a very brief shorthand version of the question: can you do a rocks analysis on texting? And so I just have rocks on texting right there, and then they would do that. But then once again, they could flip the sheet over, do some more on the back, so on and so forth. But what I really like about Cornell Notes is that they really create opportunities to learn. It's better than just taking notes because it builds more of the sort of cognitive activities that people need when they're learning. And so there's some vocabulary going on here. It dovetails really well with the Elon statement. You might remember conceptual knowledge is really important for learning. You have to have names of things, you have to have names of concepts and skills. So you have to have that conceptual knowledge. Then you have to practice that knowledge in various ways. Sometimes it's through recall of what something means. Sometimes it's the skill associated with a particular concept, like rocks in this case. You have to have metacognitive reflection, and so there is some reflection built into this in the summary. And then, of course, I can always, ask reflection questions, and then they could use those in their notes and so on. And so there, I can do that too. But there's already some, kind of a reflective element built in there, which is really important. Just in the field of education, reflection and practice are two really important parts of learning. And so Cornell Notes really helps with that. And so what I do with Cornell Notes is, after I give them an opportunity to spend time in class doing the notes, we do lesson plans like some of the ones that I've shown in uh, the last few podcast episodes. What I do is I ask for those at the end of class, and then I use them for participation. And what I do with students is I tell them, okay, I'm going to collect, I'm going to find one of the things that we did today, and I'm going to designate that as the uh, as getting credit for participation for that day. So the one thing becomes the credit, and so it hopefully keeps them on their toes just a little bit. And if they'll, go through and do the notes, the whole time, and participate in that way, then they would get participation credit for the day. And so it's low stakes because they would just get full credit, as long as the participation was done well. And so that's what I do with my participation. And something that, the Cornell notes for me came along after AI, but I think it's better than what I was doing before. Was just basically I was having them do the practice, but there was no summary built in. There's no keeping track of the vocabulary items in the queue or keeping track of the questions in the queue, and so the notes become a little less useful without those because you don't know exactly what the prompt was or what it was we were talking about. And so this is much more useful for the students in class because it gives them a chance to engage, different cognitive activities that they need, but then also later it makes it a lot easier for them to come back and see what they did and use models that I might have them do in class when they are writing something or when they're completing other kinds of assignments or even when they're working in their other classes. They might think to themselves, oh yeah, we did this in English 105 in Dr. Skeen's class, and I know I have that in my notes, and that's a model that I can then adapt to do something else in my psychology class or whatever it is for them. And so I really love the Cornell notes for those reasons. And so that's about what I have right now. And so just another little part of what I do in the classroom. And so I hope you find it useful. And so thank you once again for listening. My email is teachingwritingincollege@gmail.com. Facebook, my page is Teaching Writing in College. Blue Sky is at teachingwriting.bsky.social. YouTube is at Teaching Writing in College, and Mastodon is mastodon.social/at Teaching Writing in College. So thank you again so much. I hope your semester's gotten off to a great start. Mine starts on Tuesday of this week, and so it's coming up for me. And I'll be reporting back on how things have been going. I've got a long list, you might remember, of, well, to me it feels long now, things that I didn't anticipate paying attention to, but I'm going to try to remember to pay attention to them and report on them. Um, I have one that well, one is my AI policy. I want to share that. And I want to share some of the lesson plans that I have as I go along. I also wanted to look into, you know, coaching and motivational language. Like I think I mentioned that earlier this summer. About the kinds of sort of motivational coaching that I get from the workout apps that I use that I really like. And so I do want to get into that a little bit more because I think that could probably help students as well. I'd like to do it, and I do try to do some of it. I need to be more consistent. I'd like to learn more about it and know whether it would make a difference or not. And so I'm going to try to find research on that I want to report back on. So there will be plenty to talk about as the semester gets going here. And I appreciate you listening. So I hope things are going well for you. And I will talk to you again uh, later this week or early next week. So thanks so much.